support on your end too, Brian. And yeah, so that's pretty much my introduction. So welcome Art World students and visitors. We have Jane Cook here tonight. So welcome Jane, and amazing glass artist herself. So yeah, so let's get going, and just do be conscious of your noise background. So thanks everybody, and I'm going to go on mute and I'll let Brian take over. So welcome.
All right. Hey, everybody. My name is Brian Canfield, and I have a studio down here in San Marcos in San Diego County. It's just in the north of San Diego County. And I went to many different schools in the past, but I ended up getting my undergraduate at San Diego State, which is one of the reasons why I moved down here. And that was probably like, I think 2000 is when I moved into this area. And it wasn't until like later in my life, in my late 30s, that I decided to go back to get my master's degree. And so I went to Cal State Fullerton, and I did take the Art World class. I think it was probably like 2014. It might have been in the beginning when you just kind of started creating the class or developing it. And I remember one thing I recall was the ethnographic paper that you had us write. And I was really intrigued by that perspective of writing. And it was based off a reading that you had given us. But I had did, during that time, Joe Beal, who's a professor there, he had an exhibit at, I think it was, wherever Jennifer Frias was, in the Riverside Museum, I believe it was.
Yeah, the Sweeney Art Center, you have the wall.
Yeah. Yeah. So as a part of your class, I took it upon myself to interview Jennifer and then to talk about Joe Beal. And then separately, I interviewed Joe Beal to talk about Jennifer. And so I had this kind of interesting dialogue, and I loved it. And it got me to know them a little better. Joe Beal actually ended up being a chair on my committee. And of course, Joanna was as well. So that was a really pleasant experience. My graduate degree was a very pleasant experience. Not 100%, to be honest, because there was other machinations going on that, that's for another story. But I did graduate in, I think, 2015. And to be honest, I went back to school. It was mostly like to get credibility, credential-wise, to teach at my local college that I teach at. I've been teaching at Palomar College, which is a community college down here, since around 2008. And I was actually recruited. They had a stained glass class there, and the professor would take his class to my studio as like a class trip. And then he retired, and he's like, "Hey, do you want to teach here?" And I'm like, "Yeah, but I don't have my master's degree." And he's like, "Don't worry about it. You can get the equivalency." So there for years I had an equivalency, so I was teaching just based off of experience kind of thing. But yeah, the graduate program at Cal State Fullerton was great. And I think they say I'm the second person to officially have a stained glass emphasis at Cal State Fullerton. So that was kind of cool. So with that, I got a little presentation. I have a stained glass studio in San Marcos, and let me pull it up here for you. All right, so Barra Stained Glass Studios is the name of our company. Now this studio, it's one of the oldest. I could even probably say confidently it's the second oldest in the West. I won't bring up the oldest because they're one of our main competitors, but they're amazing. I can just tell you that, and they're easy to, as a matter of fact, they're out of LA. But Barra Stained Glass Studios started in Chicago in 1963 by John Barra. And in 2004 is when my wife and I bought it. And I like to throw up some quotes here just to kind of give some flavor for the upcoming slides. And when we bought the studio, this is essentially what we got into. And Nicole and I, at that point, in around 2003 is when I actually graduated with my undergraduate. And it took me quite a long time to get it just because I had a short stint in the military, and then I got out, and then I went around to a bunch of different schools, ended up, well, I actually met my wife, and we kind of took years of traveling here and there and ended up in San Diego. And I think I was 29 when I graduated with my undergraduates, which was in liberal studies. And I was on track to be a teacher. And at that point, my wife had already had her master's degree in city planning, matter of fact, architectural preservation. And for some reason, we just kind of got it into our minds like, hey, let's try to get a business and become our own, masters of our universe. And so we looked around, we thought about like getting a coffee shop and these other different things we had done in the past. And to be honest, like art was never my emphasis, or Nicole's emphasis. But I think we discovered this place because of the conservation and preservation of stained glass. That's kind of why we got into this business. And we met the owner, John Barra, and we wrote a business plan. So we actually got a small business administration loan. Very difficult. And I highly recommend, if you're in art and you're going to do it for a living, it would behoove you to take some kind of business class, to be honest. Not only maybe marketing, but more so like, accounting, being able to do your own payroll and run a business is so critical. But anyways, we wrote this business plan. It was about 80 pages, and we shopped it around, and we got turned down about 10 times. And we ended up getting with a nonprofit organization that helped us find the right financial institution that gave us basically a micro loan, because anything, I think, even $3 million is considered a small business loan, and ours was just a small portion, very, very small portion of that. But we finally got financed, and we were able to purchase this business. Now, when we purchased this business, John Barra at that point was probably like 78. And we were like, hey, we have stained glass, we have art in our background. But when I actually saw the level at what this studio was performing, it was pretty overwhelming. And, you're kind of like, I don't even know if we can truly do this in the end. But a part of that kind of self-consciousness, we were like, hey, John, can you stick around and be a mentor for us, and we'll pay you as an employee? So thankfully, when we bought and acquired it, he stayed on with us for about 3 years. And so for those 3 years, it was very much like a European guild type of apprenticeship. I would say it was equivalent to a master's degree when it came to learning content and just learning the business of stained glass. But it was the one-on-one, working, not just, hey, I'm going to teach you how to do this today. It was like, hey, we've got this project that's huge and we need to get it done. And so I've blown glass, and I use this kind of as an analogy. The relationship, the mentor and apprentice, was very much like, I tried to be the best assistant possible at first, even though I was the official owner of the business and he was an employee. But John, just knew so much. I didn't want to retard his work. I wanted to make it efficient. And by becoming a really good assistant, it leads you into, becoming good, almost a master eventually of whatever endeavor you're into as far as a medium in art. And so we had that for about 3 years, and then eventually we kind of moved on. And since then, we do a lot of new work. And so I pulled this picture, by the way, because this was like what we were working on simultaneously as I was in my graduate program. So let me tell you, running a business, teaching at Palomar, and then also, going to class, and I was commuting from San Diego County up to Fullerton pretty much a couple times a week. And on top of that, John Layton at the time was like on sabbatical. and he asked me to teach some of the stained glass and fusing classes there as well. So let me tell you, I was working probably from like 8 a.m. to about 11 a.m. or 11 p.m. every day. It was really stressful. But on this table was one of the projects that I was working on for my master's thesis show. And then around, you see these other projects that we're working on simultaneously. So let me tell you, know your limits and know what you're willing to put forth, but don't, stress yourself out and don't weigh yourself down so much is an incredible, valuable lesson. Because let me tell you, after all of this was said and done, at the age of 39, I got shingles after this because I got so stressed out from the whole, this is after I graduated, and then it like put me down for like a month. Insanity. But nonetheless, this was one of the cartoons I was working on. This was an 8 feet by 3 foot piece, which I'll show you a little bit later. But in doing stained glass, when you do it traditionally, and that's one of the things that I learned from John, was a very traditional approach to stained glass. They would even consider it like a Munich, Germany style of stained glass tradition that I learned. And so in doing that, you do a lot of sketches, watercolors, and then you end up doing, charcoal drawings. And then from there, I'll get into a little bit later, but from there, you start actually making the glass. So it's very drawing and painting intensive, which was really odd. When I went to Fullerton, I was very much a fish out of water. Even though they had stained glass classes, one of the main professors there actually didn't, I mean, I don't really want to say this in a negative way, but I feel like honestly, he didn't know a lot of the things that I knew technically. And so the whole painting on glass and all of that was kind of it was just something that I had, but it wasn't really in the curriculum whatsoever. And not only that, stained glass, I felt, because I was taking glass blowing and glass casting and, all of the different glass classes that they offered, but I really felt like a fish out of water because I wasn't a sculptor and I wasn't quite a painter. I didn't really fit into either one. So what I eventually kind of found through discovery of just my own analysis of like what am I doing here and where am I at in the context of the history of stained glass, it's somewhere in between. Stained glass is one of those amazing mediums that, yes, it is two-dimensional, and yes, it involves line and color and shape and painting and all the two-dimensional elements, but it's also very three-dimensional as well, because a lot of times you're dealing with architectural features. You're dealing with light coming into a space, which some would suggest that is three-dimensional in and of itself. And so I just embraced this hybridization of things, in that I wasn't just this, I wasn't just that. And I think a lot of artists today kind of have that sensibility. They're a little bit of everything, and they're kind of just going with what they like, and they're bringing things together that, necessarily historically wouldn't be put together. And I think that's a great perspective to have. So for example, this one, we're looking at a bug's eye view. And this was one of my first major projects that I was involved with when we acquired the studio. This contract was actually a part of it. And I'll talk a little bit about money just because I think it's, I think it's important to talk about money and art if you're going to be in a position where you're making a living with your art. And so this was a $70,000 contract that it was a church in Linda Vista, and this is what it was before. And so this would be considered a new piece. This isn't like a restoration or anything, but these are these old plastic, like acrylic inserts. And so the lighting in this church was just abysmal. And so John and Nicole and I designed this together to allow light into the sanctuary. And it just created a more, I don't know, meditative, sacred space. I mean, really, I eventually realized like I'm dealing in sacred space a lot of times when we do these type of religious institutions, or even, hospitals and even people's residences. it's amazing the effect that light and color can have on a space and have on one's quality of life. And to me, that is sacred space. And so transforming sacred space, there's a lot of different elements to be considered. And with stained glass in particular, the sun is something that you always have to consider, because stained glass is a dynamic medium. As the sun moves across the sky, is it dark out? Is it cloudy? Is it rainy? All of those are going to have an effect on the tone, the illumination, the vividness of a piece. And so, this project is where you jump off the cliff into the deep waters and you just swim and you just make it happen. And you don't tell the client you don't know what you're doing. You tell the client, yes, I can get this done, and you make it happen. And I found that type of problem solving is really what it was about. And this was one of the solutions that I came up with for the problems of this particular installation was, how do you install such a major um, piece without having the access of scaffolding and the money to get a huge lift? And so, as I mentioned before, I was in the military. I learned how to rappel, and I'm like, oh, I could just rappel from the cross and just go for it. And I did, and it was crazy, and it took a few days, but after 72 panels, you get the project, you get it done, and you make it happen. Everybody's happy. It's waterproof because it is a functional uh, architectural piece, but it's also an aesthetic piece. So that's what I learned in the beginning with my mentor, was like, this is what it's about. It's about doing incredibly large pieces that seem completely overwhelming, but you have to do it process one step at a time. And for me, it was always about doing the highest quality work. um, and so becoming an artist for me was about learning the material, learning the technique, doing the highest quality of those, and then the art just kind of falls into place. The creativity and the need and want to make art, that's just a given. And so becoming an artist, that was kind of the evolution for me. Stained glass painting, this was a piece that was very interesting, in that it was in Camp Pendleton, which is just south of you guys in San Diego, well, kind of San Diego, Orange County area, and an Adobe chapel. And they contacted us. And that was one thing about buying a business. Like, why did we buy a business? Why didn't we just, do stained glass? Well, it's because we bought the brand, we bought the reputation, we bought the history of the studio. And so the studio has always been much bigger than me, much bigger than my wife as an individual. And so we've always worked for the studio. And so they called us because of our reputation. And this Adobe chapel is on Camp Pendleton. It was a part of Pio Pico's original estate. And so it was about a 150-year-old Adobe chapel. It used to be a winery. It was like a stable. And in the 1940s, they the women Marines turned it into an actual functioning non-denominational chapel. And it's this tiny little tiny building. And so they had these windows commissioned, and in sometime in the late 90s, there was a flood that went through. And as you know, water and Adobe don't mix that well. And it actually washed out the entire side of this Adobe. And along the side of the Adobe were these original 1940 windows that were done by the American Glass Company, who I think are still around, but they don't do stained glass anymore. So the other windows were recovered, but there was one window that was completely washed away, and it was St. George. And so we were given a photo, and they were like, hey, we need you to recreate this. And so this is about a 3-foot by 3-foot piece that comprised of about, I think it was around 350 pieces of glass. And so through the photo, we transcribed it basically, but also interpreted it. And in the field of preservation and conservation, sometimes it's okay to, especially in something like this, the artist hand that recreates it comes through, and it's not an exact replica. And so if you look at the photo, and of course you look at our piece, it is a little different, but fundamentally the same. And you can tell it was a long time ago because I got no gray hair and that great. And the background's completely the same. The arrangement of the whole entire composition is the same. But, if you were to go, stroke by stroke for the face and, the hands, of course, there's going to be the artist's hand is going to come through and show. And that's acceptable. That's fine because it's the historicity of this piece. The whole thing that I just told you is the history, and it's an accepted practice. But I love this little chapel. We had other windows that we've done in the past, and doing work on Camp Pendleton is no joke. Like, if you're going to have a business and you're going to get contracts through the government, one thing I will say is you always need to play by the book, and always cross your T's and dot your I's, and make sure that you're licensed, you're insured, that like you are a legitimate business. And so if people try to be like, oh, why don't you do this and do that, and you can kind of, work the books and blah, blah, forget all that. You need to 100% always do the right thing when it comes to business, because let me tell you, any little fallacies or any little mistakes, they will come about and you will lose these type of bids. So to get on this base, to even get this project, like, it was super convoluted and very intense, but once you're in, you're in. And so we got another panel that we restored. It was St. Michael, and the San Diego Union Tribune picked that up. And let me tell you, when you get in the paper, even though the printed paper isn't as powerful today for marketing, it definitely makes a difference, because once you get in the paper, people like read and they make a mental note. And when they hear Berenstain Glass, they think of this type of work. And then the next day you get a call, and the next day you got a pretty big project. It's crazy how the free marketing will play out. So like today with, Instagram and YouTube and whatever you're putting out there, make sure that you are, in my opinion, make sure that you're representing yourself as you want to be represented, because it'll bite you in the butt in the long term. Anyways,
Brian,
another thing.
Questions in chat.
we have a couple questions.
Oh, great. Yeah.
Yeah. First one's what kind of color do you use for painting on the glass? Does this color work on plexiglass or no? And
No.
Are there are they water-based or oil-based paints?
All the above. There are so many different painting techniques on glass, on even plastic materials, plexiglass and the like. So when I think I have a couple slides here that will probably go over some of the painting, and I'll show you a little more process, but fundamentally they're enamels, I guess you could say, but specifically for glass painting, it is monochromatic in the traditional style, in that the glass color that you see is the glass color itself. And I tend to deal with hand blown glass, which is something that I really tried to jump into when I was at Fullerton. When I was taking glass blowing, I wasn't necessarily into making forms and vessels and, sculptural things. I was into making my own hand blown glass. Simple as that. I wanted to make big cylinders, plunger punty, flatten it out. And I was, really hearkening back 1,000 years to when stained glass was being made. These artists were making the lead, they were making the glass. So I was really trying to capture that essence. So for me, traditionally, the glass is the color, and then you paint monochromatically on it, which is typically in browns or blacks. And I use both. I use the same pigment, but you can do a water-based paint, and then you can also do an oil-based paint. Now, I could talk for a whole 5 hours on the techniques of glass painting, but that would be kiln-fired painting is what I'm referring to. Vitreous pigment, as it's called. It's basically, it's fusing kiln-fired, in that you're applying this pigment, which is fundamentally vitreous, and then it's around 1250 degrees, and then that pigment permanently fuses onto the surface and becomes homogenized with the glass. It doesn't scratch off, and that's why Notre Dame, those Chartres, those windows exist. It's the original glass, the original pigment. It's the lead that typically breaks down, but as long as acid rain and sand and it doesn't break, like glass has a geological life. And so that's why I believe in the color coming from the glass itself. Now, in the Victorian times, there's another movement where more enamels were applied, which are the colored pigment that's applied to clear glass. And so that pigment has a certain, it's kind of like gouache and watercolor, it can be transparent or even, dense. But to me, enamels will never capture the true brilliance and illuminated qualities of glass itself when it comes to color. So I tend to use the vitreous pigment on colored glass, but not to say that I don't do the other techniques, silver stain and enamels, because sometimes it demands for restoration and conservation to use those techniques. There was another question here. I don't know.
Second question is, are the majority of your projects church related, or do some clients have a love for stained glass and have their house windows as decorations of stained glass?
Yeah, it's all the above. Stained glass has been around as a medium, for over 1,000 years. It was some of the first, window openings that kept weather out, but also allowed light in. And a lot of the design and functionality came with the material technological limitations. Crown glass, you could only get so big. And then when they started making cylinders, you could get much bigger panes of glass. So residential, commercial, religious, it's all the above. And so I can only speak to, as a demographic of what has come in, and it's changed over time. In the beginning, it was more new religious work, and now it's kind of transferred into preservation and the restoration, and being the steward of the cultural resource of stained glass in our communities. But we take on any project, and to be honest, my love for stained glass and my belief in its ability to affect the quality of life of anybody that is existing in an environment on a daily basis, it's extremely powerful. I believe in it, and so I put as much effort and as much importance on a little bathroom window with a hummingbird in it as I do with a 300 square foot opening, because each one, regardless of size or context, has a profound, or has the ability to have a profound effect on somebody's life. And I don't take that lightly at all. And I put as much energy, even though the $300 and the $30,000 project takes as much talking with the client, which can be very annoying, but I try not to let that steer how much time I give to everybody. But anyways, another portion, and I'll show you some slides in a second to answer further some of those questions, but Robert Sowers is a stained glass theorist, and when I read his theories in some of his books, and I believe I think it's called The Language of Stained Glass or Language of Glass. I don't know, it's really bad that I don't remember titles all that well. I'm no Joe Beal. But when I read him, I mean, it really changed my perspective of what stained glass is. And so, dealing with light and dealing with this built environment, it really opened my eyes to, the power of, art in our lives. And I highly recommend Robert Sowers if any of you guys are interested in glass, specifically stained glass, because not only does he talk about stained glass, he talks about it in context to visual art, sculpture, fine art. I mean, just a brilliant writer. But I must say, don't look too deep into his personal life, because he would be probably canceled today. But hey, theory's theory, personal life is personal life. I try to separate those two things. my main, my main tool, my baby, is my brush. Like, this is my painting brush. This is a Badger brush. This was my mentor's brush, and it was his mentor's brush. And so this brush is probably, I think, around 65, 70 years old, Badger hair. And this is like, I don't even know. I would cry my eyes out for probably a year if anything ever happened to it. But this is what it's all about. This is the most important thing in my studio besides my wife, my Badger brush. And so when it comes to painting, this is white glass that has layers. And so we kiln fire. I have multiple kilns. My best kiln is a front loader, which you'll see in a second. It's a convection oven. And so in painting on glass, typically you do it in layers. Like, you'll do your line work first, which is what we call trace lines. And you have specific brushes. And so all of these dominant type of lines you see, you do first, and then you fire, and you bring it out of the kiln, and then you do all your shading, and that's where the Badger brush comes in. And then you do another firing. And so you can see here with, one of the differences with glass and painting, which I always liked, and I feel like, I almost feel like an elitist when I talk it in this way, but painters, spend a lifetime to try to capture and mimic light, whereas stained glass, you're literally painting with light itself. And so when I have a white piece of glass, for me, I don't add black to give shade, and I don't add white tint for a highlight. I do add pigment, dark pigment, to control the amount of light going through, and that thus then creates a shadow. And then the trace line is the ultimate shadow because it doesn't allow any light through. But then these little tiny highlights here are when I'm exposing the raw glass itself, and that is a highlight. That's kind of one of the fundamental differences and approaches of painting on glass. And so, like scribing, putting down a matte, finger painting. Not only do I paint with one of my main tools is a bamboo chopstick. I use a lot to scribe and take away pigment. I use a lot of scrub brushes, as they're called. I use the Badger brush. I also use very traditional painting brushes, but this is kind of the process where, you paint on the glass, you control the light, and then ultimately, as stained glass, you have to build it. So you're also dealing with lead, and lead is a very specific line structure that can vary in different sizes and widths, but you have to incorporate both lead lines, the painting lines, the forms. I mean, there's so many elements when it comes to creating a painted work of stained glass. And you notice underneath is a cartoon, as we call it. And so these line structures are usually indicative of the lead itself. So cutting the glass, I mean, it's so intensive. If you guys haven't taken stained glass, it's very physical, but man, it's super rewarding. Yeah. Got some music.
All right, since we have to pause, a question from
I
chat.
muted everybody.
Yeah, question from chat. What do you need to have a sustainable business? What does the necessity, or do the necessities differ between businesses?
Right.
He's muted. Yeah.
Sorry.
I'm back.
Okay. I muted everybody when we had a moment there. So
Yeah, it's all good. I mean, that's a tough one. I can't say that I'm a business, expert by all means. Matter of fact, to write the business plan that we did write, it was all contingent on me buying MBA for Dummies, and that's what really streamlined my understanding of business. But getting into business, having a partner that is super intelligent, we basically taught ourselves. And so I think that's one of the key assets you need to have is you need to know your strengths and weaknesses. And if you're not strong at something, teach yourself, but then recognize your limitations, whether you can actually do it or not, and then outsource it to someone else. So we have a certified public accountant that we use at the end of the year, but that's it. We do all the accounting ourselves. So having appropriate business tools such as, QuickBooks or whatever computer programs you need, super important. But what does it take to sustain a business? You know what it takes? Grit and perseverance and being able to live a very modest life, and also believe in what you're doing and do it to the highest ability that you can. And again, don't care about money, because I don't know many artists that are working that are rich. Maybe some, but if you're at that level, you can outsource all the major assets you need as a business. But that's a really tough one to answer, to be honest. I think it comes down to character. That's what you need. You need to have the right character for the right business, and that never give up attitude. It's so cliche, but oh my God, it's so true. We made it through. Matter of fact, when we bought our business, like 4 years later, we had the recession of 2008. I had to call my dad up and be like, can I have a loan? I mean, that's what it took support, family. I mean, it was insane, but thankfully, like, perseverance and just like believing in the quality and what you're doing, and hopefully you're good enough to where your reputation will grow and the business starts to come to you. And that's kind of what happened with us. So this was one of the I think I might have to redo my screen share here.
Right. Another question from the chat. You mentioned something about the institution or client able to get back to you. What does that mean? Did you mention to have all legal aspects of your business in order, such as licenses and business permits?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we acquire a business, getting a seller's permit, getting workers' compensation, when you have employees, there's definitely a ton of legitimate things that you need to handle, make sure that you're covered. I think we carry about $3 million in liability insurance. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And so, paying your permits on time, I mean, I mean, I don't even know what our monthly bills are, to be honest. They're tremendous, but having everything in order and doing it consistently is really how you become successful. Because if you can set up a system that works for you and you're meeting all of the obligations that are required, because sometimes, like, we would be required to have a certain amount of insurance on our van or something, if we drive onto a site. You don't know that until it's required of you, and then you have to be able to go and the right path to get the appropriate means of whatever that job requires of you. And when you're dealing with hospitals and in government institutions in particular, like, they really require a lot of stuff. But like I said, like, once you establish the minimum standard of what what is being asked of you, it's just kind of like creating a good portfolio, man. Once you got it, all you got to do is kind of tweak it a little bit for the next presentation of it. Once you get everything ready, that's really the most important. But you learn along the way and you make mistakes, but it's not, making mistakes. It's knowing how to recover. It's knowing how to problem solve is really another great asset of maintaining a business. So this is the type of work that we do. We do new installations. This is the exterior. I think this is in Valley Center in San Diego County. And we do work all over Southern California, but the slides are probably local for me. Getting licensed to be able to be on a lift, to operate a boom lift. If an inspector comes around and you're doing this type of work, and look, I don't even have on my construction hat, like, that's a huge deal, to be honest. You can get like a $10,000 fine for doing what you're looking at, but not being licensed properly. So I'm telling you, you got to know what's expected and know, the worst case scenario and plan for that. And so in large architectural pieces like this, a lot of times, like, this is one big composition. And so we have to be able to figure out the proper code compliance type of framing and how to install this. So getting into installations, because, when you're dealing in the public space, like a church like this, you're dealing with pretty major liability issues. So like if this fell out now, we would probably be liable for that. And if it fell on somebody, like look how high up these clear stories are. That's a pretty huge drop right over all the congregation sitting down below. Like it's a pretty big deal. And they're gonna look for you when it comes to liability for sure. So again, plan ahead. And that's why you carry $3 million in umbrella insurance. This was an interesting piece. This is like our first interior piece that was backlit. And this was before LEDs were really prominent and even accessible monetarily. And so we had this big closet. And so I lined the entire back of the closet with crinkled aluminum foil. And then we put lights around the perimeter on the inside of this closet behind here. But notice it's about equal illumination. And so knowing how to install stained glass and deal with the lighting is paramount, because you don't want the sides to be all bright and then the money in the middle here to be all dark, because let's be honest, this is what it's about. It's about the saint. It's not about, all of this going on around it. That's all secondary. So lighting controls the narrative just as much as the composition. You mess up the lighting, it messes everything up. And so that's what it looks like from far away. So that was an interesting
question from chat. There's quite a few here.
Okay.
Do you use any social media to promote your business? If so, what kind, and what kind of impact has it had?
We've never used any social media ever in the past. We had a website and we just it was word of mouth, man. Like reputation is how we get jobs, and also kind of being in the know and being on certain bid sites would help us. But up until honestly, like a few months ago, I didn't even dabble in social media all that much, because I don't know, man, it just wasn't a part of our, business time, in that, how much time you spend on social media and to get a return from it. It was more efficient for us to spend time on other things that I know would likely get us a job, like finding a bid, finding a church, preparing a bid, which, putting a bid together, it could be 30 hours is nothing. And that's 30 hours that you might not ever get back because you might not get the bid. Getting 1 out of 10 is like super successful. I mean, it's almost like being a major league baseball player batter. Like if you fail 80% of the time, you're actually doing really good, And so for bids, if you're putting together 10 bids in a year, that's 300 hours of your time. And so that's the type of effort that we went into. More on the whole, social media. It's a different game. Like my experiences in the past isn't as relevant right now. It just was for the time, and it was the evolution that we had and we went through. But I would say that now social media probably is going to be important. But let me tell you, think about the demographic of who we get a lot of projects from: older, affluent, richer people, and they're not hiring someone off of Facebook. They're not hiring someone off of Twitch, Matter of fact, they don't even know what Twitch is. So why would I invest time in, live streaming on Twitch when I could be literally like advertising in the local Catholic magazine or something? Those type of decisions, you really got to know your market and know where the money's coming from, and then put your time into that. That's very, very important. But it's different for everybody, and it's different for time and place. So if your market is 20 to 25 and you're creating avatars for whatever, like, yeah, man, you should be all over Twitch and Instagram or whatever. So I think it's more of a personal choice. This is just another church. So here is a residential piece. and this is interior, and this is like an office space back here. And so the lighting is super complicated, as you know, like there's overhang, there's openings, there's ambient light everywhere. And so we had to put something in here that we always ask the people, like, well, what do you want from this? And a lot of times they're like, well, we want good lighting and we don't want people to see us when we're walking around naked. And we're like, boom, there it is. That's what you need and that's what you want. So the choices of the type of glass, the type of design, definitely play a part of that. So this is a close up of that window. And so this was just an abstract like landscape piece. You have the beach, sand, you have water, and then you have the mountains and the sky. And I was like, well, I need to come up with some kind of design element that like allows me not to have this big massive piece of glass. I need to separate it. And so I came up with this idea like, oh, well, what if you were looking through a telescope or something? This is the type of circular, type of feel. And, simple choices, meeting the criteria of, the client. I mean, that's what it's about. Commission work has had a lot of bad, I don't know what it is. Fine art versus commission work, sell out. I don't know. There's been a lot of baggage when it comes to like being a commissioned artist. But let me tell you, commissioned art is some of the most difficult art that you're going to do because you have to know how to compromise and meet the client's needs, but also keep your artistic liberty and allow and convince them that what you're suggesting is the right thing to do. And let me tell you, commission art, I'm gonna say it again, is some of the hardest that you'll ever do. But one thing about this type of work is I know where it's going. I know the client. Like, if you make a painting and you hang it in the gallery and somebody buys it, you never get to meet the client. And let me tell you, that's some of the most rewarding, satisfying moments of my life is meeting the people and creating something that just makes them happy and makes them love their space. I mean, I don't know. That's way more rewarding for me than, having autonomous detached art. Not that I don't do that. Um, and not to say that you can't get super stylized and painted work in, I mean, thankfully we're in a pretty affluent geographic area and, places like Rancho Santa Fe and some of these, Del Mar and La Jolla, like some of these people got real money. And when it comes to, patrons of art, there's a whole culture out there that has, had people that are supporting the arts. And those are the type of people that you want to meet and get a relationship with, a long-term relationship, because not only are you going to make one piece for them, they're going to come back 10 years from now and get another piece from you, be it a painting, a sculpture, or stained glass. Relationships with people is what makes good business. And so when it comes to doing the process of stained glass, this is a very traditional approach in that we choose to do watercolor scaled renderings. And so, if you've taken architecture or any type of class like that, pay attention because scaled drawings are very important. And, there's companies out there that specifically use Photoshop and Illustrator and create these sketches on a digital platform. And that's great. And they look very good. But let me tell you that when I present a watercolor that is intimate and flawed at the same time, it's not as sterile and it's not as clean as digital art, but it's more convincing to clients in my experience. Like when they see this, it convinces them that they're going to pay you $15,000 and know that they're going to get something that's going to work versus, I mean, not that digital art is bad, but in my opinion, the architect that presents a hand-built model with trees that they've made, it translates better sometimes for certain clients than, a, put on the Oculus, get into this virtual reality type of presentation, which both are applicable, but know who you're presenting to and have an instinct and trust that instinct of what's going to work to convince that person. That's what's good business as well. Half of getting a job or a commission is 50% selling yourself, convincing that person, like, I got what it takes, man. Believe in me, believe in me. And by the way, here's a concept sketch of what I want to present. And all of that together is really what sells.
On the topic of concepting and designing, one question in chat: are the designs all created personally in Photoshop and then once finished handmade, or does the client normally have a mind, or does the client normally have in mind an exact design, or all the designs invented by you and your company?
So we're still completely hand everything. We do everything by hand because it's my opinion that it's about intimacy for me in art. And, when I'm using a stylus or using a mouse, it just lacks a certain connectivity for me versus when I have pencil, graphite, charcoal, watercolor, vitreous pigment, like that is hand connection, direct connection. And I finger paint a lot, as well. And every time I do a design, I make it better. And so listening to the client is first and foremost the most important thing. Being able to prompt their vision by asking appropriate questions and then allowing them to elaborate, because a lot of times your clients are hiring you because guess what? They don't know anything about art. They just know they want something interesting and colorful, and they want, the birth of Christ or something. When it comes to religious iconography, there's certain standards, there's certain, classical themes, but nobody knows what Jesus looks like. Nobody. You can go back 400 years, but you're still 1600 years off of what Jesus looked like. So all religious iconography and figures are made up. And so we definitely have like a stylized Jesus that we do, in addition to just a style of figurative work that we do. And so, but I can't say that we don't take from sources. I mean, what artist doesn't? Like, you have to look at good work, allow that to kind of seep in, and take what is going to work for you. And so in glass painting, this is a very traditional approach as well, process wise. Like, this is my easel, which is in the back of the studio, and you wax the glass up. And so now I'm able to erect and I can paint as one big composition versus painting 50 different pieces of glass. So this is a very traditional approach. And here you can see the color comes from the glass itself. And then you can see here the pigment that I'm applying. Then you take it off. There you can see some of the brush strokes. Then you meticulously take it off, put it on a kiln shelf, and then you put it in the kiln and you fire it. And then you put it back up on the easel. Like, it's super labor intensive, but that just is another example of the process of glass painting. And then that's the original work. And that's what it looks like in place. And so we're working on a series of windows. And so this is one church that, as funds come in, we're filling these. And so we're on number 1, 2, 3, 4. We're on number 5 right now that I'm getting ready to install. And we've been doing this project for about 12 years now.
Another question from the chat, there's 2 more. First one is, I've seen a shop that sells very complex glass sculptures. Speaking of growing your reputation, I wonder if there are companies or labels that you would that would represent you in the glass world.
Yeah, so I have 2 lives, just like I was talking, I have this dichotomy of, I'm like in this world, I'm in this world simultaneously, and I've kind of taken them both. This is one world of the business, and then I have a whole nother life as an individual artist. So I think getting representation, and I like to differentiate, this is architectural work that we're talking about versus autonomous work, which is a standalone object of stained glass or the like, and putting it into any setting. It could be a museum, and with LEDs, it's really changing the format of where stained glass can be presented. It really, in the last 10, 20 years, could you actually take glass and properly hang it on the wall and get it proper illumination. And so even stained glass is kind of changing as autonomous and architectural in and of itself. But that's kind of a different beast. I don't think the company would be represented in that we represent ourselves. But I think as an individual artist, I think if you want to get into LA or Berlin or New York or something, like, you have to go more traditional gallery route. Possibly, I don't know. I'm not represented, by the way.
All right, last question, or last one right now in the chat. Do you think that you would still have the same success you currently have if you started your own business instead of buying an existing one?
No way. Not even. I don't think so at all. I mean, the key to my success was getting a mentor and buying an established reputation. But not only that, but being able to meet the expectations of that reputation and go beyond it, because I feel like the studio now is actually performing at a higher level than it has in the past. And let me tell you, John Barra is a recognized American stained glass master, undoubtedly, and his body of work is immense. But, I think having that to build on was paramount and worth every penny. We paid off our business in 7 years. So, I mean, it was, I don't know. It's not like we planned all that, but I think, again, our character, Nicole and I, as a matter of fact, my success is wholly contingent upon my wife, because she and I together is immensely stronger than either of us individually. And not only that, our employees are just as important, the people I bring on. And speaking of, I've hired at least 8 people from my college. I would have a class, I would see somebody in class that I'm just like, that person is super impressive. I'm gonna offer them a job. And they get in and they learn, and they're around for a year or two, and they're just as important as, myself and anyone else, because they end up becoming an integral part of the quality. And we also listen to them as far as design goes. I mean, just because you're a freshman in college doesn't mean that you don't have good design instincts. And, we might not take your design, but certainly we want to talk with you about it, because it's all the process. And so I think character, again, that's what really makes it. This piece right here ended up being super crazy, emotional and personal, because this, and I don't want to get too deep into it, but we did this installation we did another one as well. This is like your traditional rose window, right? And, unfortunately, at a certain point, my mother-in-law passed away, and she ended up having her services here in this church. And so we made this sacred space. And, I'm not a religious, I'm spiritual, but I'm not necessarily religious. And, I have a certain disconnect when it comes to churches, in that it's more business, and I do acknowledge their community and cultural significance, but I don't necessarily partake. But this particular one, like, it was super profound. And every time I see it, like, I feel it welling up in me, because that was a very tragic time. But I was able to experience this space as a viewer, because I've never actually had that opportunity to get married, have a funeral in any of the spaces that we've ever created. So this was like a groundbreaking, moving, tragic, but profound moment of our lives, for sure. And so with that, it takes considerable knowledge just to realize the extent of your own ignorance, Thomas Sowell. I mean, just when you think you're awesome and you're the shit, you realize, like, you're not. And this is a current project that we're working on now. We're restoring these openings here. And so we've done 2 so far. This was built in 1913, incredible church, First Presbyterian. And so this is one of our current projects we're working on that we already finished. So we took out every single one of these panels. Conservation, preservation, you have to meet credentials just to do this. You can't just, it's like, do you think the person in the bottom of the museum in the laboratory has credentials if they're working on, restoring a Van Gogh? Yes. Like, you just don't let a person willy-nilly touch up a piece. Well, this isn't a Van Gogh, but this is significant historical pieces of artwork. And, you have to know what you're doing, and you have to be able to make the right choices to meet the Secretary of Interior standards for preservation. And that's a whole nother story, but process is everything. Organization is everything, because we counted, there's over 10,400 pieces of glass just in this one opening. There's 54 panels. Every single piece is taken out, washed, analyzed, recreated if we have to, and then rebuilt. It goes in the exact same spot that it was in. And this takes about a year to do. And so process, again, is everything. Organization is everything.
All right, question from chat.
Mhm.
How do you become humble and have an open mind when it comes to art? I ask because nowadays there's too much arrogance. What is it that you do to keep grounded and to be aware to become better?
You talk to people like Joanna or Joe Beal, and you get confronted with an intellect that is so far superior than yours, it humbles you very quickly. And you realize, like, okay, I'm good at this, but I've got so much more that I can learn and I want to learn. And then, of course, in your particular medium, or in art in general, like some of the artists that I'm super inspired by is Chuck Close, Mark Bradford, Kara Walker, Rothko. I mean, Judith Schechter is like the top stained glass artist in the world right now, in my opinion. And when I see her work, as much as I know, it befuddles me. I'm just like, how is she making this? It's incredible, so that's all it takes. You just have to see work and people that are just so beyond, and you recognize that you'll never be at that level, but hey, don't give up. You have a place. There's an elite niche out there, but most of us are existing somewhere here, and that's perfectly fine. You just have to be comfortable with that. And I don't know what it is to be humble, to be honest. I try to be. I mean, I definitely have moments of elitism for sure, but as soon as, like I said, as soon as I'm there, I get involved with a project with famous architects and people that are just so beyond, what I will ever be. And then I think, what, I might not be building this church, but I'm making a significant contribution, and I'm making an element of this church. This is a Point Loma Nazarene University. And so this was a architect design. I can't remember the architect, super famous, but there was an old little chapel here, and he was brought in to take out this chapel and then built this new chapel. But the old, and it's not stained glass, it's called dalle de verre. It's faceted glass, 3/4 inch thick, held together with an epoxy resin. Matter of fact, my mentor was one of the pioneers of it in the United States. So that's where I learned it from. It's a different art medium, but it's still glass is glass. Like whether you're glass blowing or casting or dalle de verre, like it's all glass. And so you have to learn how to utilize it in whatever context it's needed and demanded of, be it sitting on a pedestal or creating a meditative space for the students. So we took these panels out of the church and put them into a different context environment. And so this little seat here is where you can go and meditate. And then there was one significant piece, which is, this is a close-up of it, multiple panels, have a lift, to even get to it. And so we had to, some of these were cracking, so we had to restore a lot of these as well. And notice, having a seam line, this is one big composition. And notice, like, these hands, like, it's very important that this contour lines up. These can't be off. So when we repour these, documenting it, knowing the original design, I mean, if you're off a half inch, it destroys the composition. So again, process for us is everything. And so eventually it becomes one large composition. And so this is, you know, it has a wooden frame around it now, but this is one of the iconic pieces when you enter campus. And I'm humbled to, I didn't create this, but I remade this and I adaptively reused it. I mean, that would be the appropriate term, adaptive reuse. You know, don't get rid of the art. So many people would just throw this away. So many contractors just demolish in California, and so many cultural resources are just lost forever. When you spend a little bit of money, it can be reused appropriately and even enhance it more than it was originally. And so that's a great project. I love that one. And so, you know, another heady quote for you, Herman Hesse. And of course, you know, with the pronouns being man and himself, got to get rid of all that, right? But it's about everybody's unique, you know, everybody has a place. Finding your place in the art world is difficult, and you may never find your place. You might not even have a place in the art world. That's fine. But try to find a place that when you wake up, you don't begrudgingly go to it. Like every day I wake up, and I haven't woken up with an alarm clock for like 15 years. So, I mean, that's one of the perks of being an artist, I guess. But every day I wake up, man, I can't wait to get to my studio. I can't wait to get my hands on work and make something and get into that ontological time and feed my soul and then make my own work, whatever. Like, I love it. And if you can find that, good for you, because that's going to change your life and make a great life. And so Cal State, you know, I had fun here. And when I was involved with Cal State Fullerton, to me, it was about learning the different iterations of glass and then combining them into new art forms that were outside of my understanding, at least my experience. And so I got into sculpture, and I got into the question of like, well, what is stained glass? What does it mean to have fine art of stained glass? You know, you'd be surprised that fine art isn't actually accepted as, or I'm sorry, stained glass isn't accepted as a fine art. I mean, that's a crazy statement, but I think that is kind of where we're at. And stained glass, what that means, it's not negative connotation. It means that it's an emerging, after 1200 years time, to emerge and get out of the architectural limitations and get out of the baggage of religion and get out of, you know, what everybody thinks stained glass is and reinvent it. And so when I did this piece, this was a part of my thesis show, in that, you know, from far away, this just looks like colored lights. But as you get closer, I was forcing, this is cast glass that, you know, has an opening. Like who, you know, it's a hole in glass. Like, to me, that's crazy. That's so different than what I was used to. But, and then I put something behind it that forced the viewer to really exert themselves to look deeper into the glass. And if they looked long enough and engaged long enough, they would discover there's something behind it that is traditional stained glass. And so I was about, you know, questioning and trying to evolve what stained glass is in the contemporary art arena. I don't know if I did it. This is also another piece I did. This was for art and archaeology exhibit. So this is more of my personal work, right? And this was called The Construct of Biblical Man. And the county of San Diego put on an art and archaeology. And so you had all these different like basket weaving and like sketches of archaeological sites. And so I put this thing in, and this is all recovered material from all the old stained glass that we have been dealing with. And I put it into a workboard type process, you know, presentation. And you know, you look at this thing and you go, well, what is this? Is this art? Is this fine art? Like, is this stained glass? And that's exactly what I want the viewer to think. Like, what the hell am I looking at? And it forces them to, you know, confront an established definition of what I'm railing against now. And unbeknownst to me, it won first place, and I didn't go to the show, and I could have like got all these accolades and all this stuff, and I didn't even show up like an idiot, and I really regret not being there. And then another series that I've been involved with personally is I was thinking about saints, and I do a lot of iconography, and I was like, man, what do we have today that does something comparable to telling the stories of the religious narrative of a stained glass window? And I'm like, you know what? Comics do that. Comics, because good and evil, right and wrong, and oh my gosh, look at the graphic. This is literally Hulk #1, page 5. This is the actual comic book page. And I was like, I'm going to take these graphic images that translate so well and so easily into stained glass. It's ridiculous. I loved it. And I was like, look, what is stained glass? Is this religious? I mean, look at the colors. They're the primary colors of, jewel tones. That's what stained glass traditionally is. And it talks about, technology. And this is from 1962, I think it was. And so I dubbed it Modern Day Myths. And so I started doing a series of modern day myths, which culminated in the piece that we started in the beginning. And this is the actual piece that is a wall hung piece backlit with LEDs, 8 feet by 3 feet. And so this was a part of my master's thesis as well. Honestly, one of the greatest pieces I think I've made to date. I love it. I mean, and you know what inspired me was it has a mythical character, but I de-emphasized it. I took him out of the frame, right? And I created this nebula because I'm really into physics and space. And I mean, who isn't? Come on, we just landed on Mars like 5 hours ago. It's amazing, right? And I love looking up into space, and I love looking at those long exposed nebula astrophotography, and I love the colors. And I'm like, bam, that's my influence. And so I started kind of just taking stuff that I was interested in and hybridizing it, putting it all together, and then creating something interesting and unique, I hope. So that's where we end this. And so speaking of social media, I do have a website, barrowglass.com. Don't put a lot of emphasis on it. It's really just a online portfolio, has been from day one, for my liturgical religious clients to go peek at what we do and maybe be interested. I do have an Instagram. Hit that up. That's way more intimate. That's far more personal. That actually gives you a better insight of who I am as an artist. And then Joe Beal, speaking of Joe Beal and I, we started a podcast called The Beholder Share that we're now doing. And it's just a conversation about, art and contemporary art and things that we find interesting. And we throw that up on YouTube, and you'll probably find some D&D stuff too there, because I'm into D&D, Critical Role. Yep. And, so I do Twitch stream, all of that stuff as well. And so I do personal stuff, but it has nothing to do with our company, to be honest. And there you go, folks.
Wow.
Was that a lot?
That was amazing. I mean, that final piece, I'll never forget seeing that in the gallery, Brian.
What was weird about that piece? I framed it and I put the LEDs probably like 3 inches right behind the stained glass. And when I was making it and I was constructing it, because I had to learn how to do LEDs, and I put 8 strips of 8 feet horizontally. And I was always working close up to it. And it wasn't until we got in the gallery and we walked like 10 feet, 20 feet back that this diode started to show through the glass. And I was like, oh my gosh, that sucks. It just ruined the piece, but you had to get up close to like get rid of it. It was a weird visual phenomena I had not anticipated at all. So it was a really good lesson, but I wish I didn't have to actually learn it while I was in the gallery.
I remember having that conversation. Yeah. And didn't you change it before the opening, or did you kept it?
I think I put, I don't know. I tried to like put diffusers and stuff, but it wasn't.
Yeah.
even like 5, 6 years ago, technology's really changed as far as like accessibility and, can you actually get a bunch of LEDs at a good price? And,
Mhm.
you know, I'm still learning, to be honest.
Have you
So now I'm doing a little intimate. If you go to my Instagram, like you'll see my new series on the Beholder Share. I'm doing these like little 12 by 12 little intimate pieces that are supposed to be hung on the wall. So we'll see how those turn out.
you still have that one in your house? You didn't sell that one, did you?
No, I mean, I've never sold any of my personal stuff, to be honest. It's crazy. I'm just like holding on to it.
It's incredible. So
I don't
anyway,
know why.
let the chat begin. So
Yeah.
Calvin, great job. Any more questions we got?
I've got a question, Brian.
Yeah.
Do you use your personal work as examples for your portfolios, or do you usually mainly use your commission artwork?
Okay, so if I'm trying to get, liturgical clientele, they definitely probably won't get the whole Hulk piece or, my interpretation of Sleeping Venus, which was Wonder Woman. Like they probably won't get that. And to be quite honest, some of my personal work, it's super dark and crazy. As you saw the severed head there earlier, right? That was actually from Dante's Divine Comedy. And so I really think about not, it's bad, I guess, because, you should just be like, yeah, it's my work. I don't care. But I can't be like that, because if I turn off the wrong client at the right time, it's disastrous, and that could be a huge financial hit. So I definitely edit how I present myself or the company specifically. So it's situational for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. I want to bring up Judith Schechter's work, to be honest.
Oh, do it. Yeah.
She's gonna blow your mind. I mean, I'm just so in awe. And when I say, the top stained glass artist in the world, like I mean it, and I don't say that lightly. Are you with me? All right, there it is. That's stained glass. I mean, I know how she does it, and I know exactly how she does it. But like there's still lead lines, There's still lead lines. And she's really,
Yeah, it does look like it.
her social commentary on, women, feminism. I mean, it's incredible. Like she's so prolific in her work, and her narratives are just so heavy and so powerful, but yet so incredibly beautiful at the same time. It's like this crazy mix of macabre and beauty. I mean, who paints a glass vessel on glass? That's ridiculous. And it looks that good. That's one piece of glass right there, by the way. It's just, these are all individual pieces of glass.
What's the scale on it, Brian?
I think this is usually, her work's usually like 30 inches by 30 inches.
So
She just had a major exhibit, and this is all wall hung as well.
so she uses LED.
Yep. She uses LEDs. And so when I look at this work, I'll never be able to create anything close to this, in my opinion. And that's humbling. That's humbling.
You think she trained as a stained glass artist, or she was a drawing and painting person?
Gosh, let's look at her bio. Yeah, when you look at somebody's CV as well, it kind of, oh yeah, she's from RISD. So she got her BFA from Rhode Island School of Design glass program, which of course RISD, I would, in my opinion, RISD and probably the VCU, Virginia Commonwealth, is probably the two top glass programs in my opinion. I mean, she's in the Met in New York. I mean, the Albert Museum in London, Corning Museum. She's been in the Whitney. Like, come on. Like, if this isn't fine art, what is, you know? But yeah, I think she learned glass, but I think a lot of the stuff is self-taught, you know? I think just through being in, and you learn the material, and you get tips from people, and you're like, oh, I'm going to try this. I mean, that's how really most of your learning is, I think. 30% of college will come to play, but most of it is just doing it.
Other questions for Brian? You got anything in the chat, Calvin?
Nothing so far.
Now I'm seeing stained glass everywhere, and the cat looks like, you know, Brian's moved into animated stained glass.
Yeah. Well, here's my image. That's from the Hulk. That's when Bruce Banner's turning into the Hulk. That's how I feel sometimes. I'm like, technology.
So that has no lead in it at all.
No, that's just one piece of silver stain on clear water glass, as a matter of fact.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So how do you price your project?
Great question. I love talking about money. Because nobody does, right? Nobody talks about money. And, you know, in my classes, I always make an effort to talk about money because, like, I tell them how much I make as a professor. I tell them everything, you know, because some people, they never get that. So what we do for our architectural work is our minimum is $200 a square foot minimum. So if you walk in, whether you want a bathroom, you know, piece, or you want a religious piece, I'm like, okay, how big's your window? And they're like, oh, it's 4 feet by 4 feet. And I'm like, okay, 4 times 4 is 16, $200 a square foot times 16, whatever that is. And that includes, you know, meeting with you maybe 1 or 2 times, because I give, going back to someone's question about like design and concept sketches and stuff, I generally will listen very carefully, take notes, maybe even sketch in front of them. Because let me tell you, clients love to see artists at work. Do a little doodle in front of them. You're like, you thinking about something like this? And they're like, yeah. So then I go back, and then honestly, Nicole's the main designer, so I can't even take a lot of credit. And then so we do a scaled rendering, and then we present it to them. We're like, hey, is this what you're thinking of? And they're like, okay, yes, but we want to change this, this, and this. And I'm like, great, that's meeting number 1. Then we do a full-size cartoon that's black and white in charcoal typically. And we're like, is this what you want? And then they're like, yes. So that's meeting number 2. And then maybe if they're good clients and are paying enough money, I might, you know, meet with them 3rd time, but generally that's it. And so from that 4th, we make the piece. Now that's the minimum. So we go up and up and up when it comes to, okay, do you want hand blown glass? Because that's the difference of, you know, $12 a square foot versus $150 a square foot. I have glass that is literally $150 a square foot. It's ridiculous, but it's exquisite. It's the best you'll ever see. Hand blown, matter of fact, typically from Lambert's glass house in Germany. So material definitely ups it. And then if I'm going to paint, and if we're going to sign the piece, so generally that goes up to like maybe $650 to $800 a square foot, even more. It can be $1,000 a square foot. So that's generally how. Now that encompasses material, time, installation, all of the above. So that's like a basic approach. Now, when it comes to like personal work, I don't know. I'm just kind of like, I wonder what somebody would pay for this. And then I'm like, $3,500, and I put it out there and nobody buys it. And I'm like, oh, that's too much, or it's not in the right place. That's where I see it. I try not to lower my price. I just think, it's not It's not the right moment yet, you know? So that's
So
how I
you're-
price.
So when you're discussing about like materials, do you also like charge more based on like how many colors are used in the project?
No, because if you reflect back to the studio image, I have a literal wall of glass. I mean, that's really the majority of a lot of the purchase of the company was the inventory of glass. And so for a stained glass artist, that's like, you know, having your little acrylic palette, you know, different colors and pigment, and you got all your tubes. Well, my tubes are sheets of 32 by 40 inches. And when I want color, I just pull from my sheets, or I buy new glass as well. But the variation of color definitely has nothing to do with it. Complexity of design, like if you look at this piece behind me, what, you know, maybe 8 pieces of glass, very minimal. But that same space with 400 pieces of glass, that's way more intricate, takes way more of my time. So we consider things like that as well. Our square footage, we know how to relate it to our basic time and materials, like how long it takes. And Nicole has an incredibly extensive estimation program that we've developed over time. And so, you know, when we're trying to think about how to process 52 panels, take them apart, clean them, document them, and you know, we do extensive documentation, research. Just photographing could take, you know, 15 to 20 hours. And so for that, I generally charge about $90 an hour for my time. And so if I'm the one doing documentation, the client's like, you're having me spend $5,000 on documentation? That's crazy. And so that's like when I'll hire somebody that has art history or art and they want some experience. And generally we start people out around $13 an hour. You know, within a couple months, you might get up to 15. And then so we'll have them do documentation with our oversight. So then that helps in our, you know, making money basically. So a lot of variables when it comes to planning, estimating, and actually doing what you're going to do for a good price to where you actually make money. And so really we make enough money to sustain ourselves, our business, and our personal lives, which can't ask for much more than that.
It
I
took a
also
while
have
to get all those details worked out with the whole sort of process in accounting, I imagine.
Nicole is, I've said it time and again, like she's literally one of the smartest people I've met and know, literally. And I'm fortunate to have married her and have her as a partner, you know what I mean? And her brain power and my brain power together, it's just about having common sense and making good decisions, you know? And like, again, like you don't always build things from scratch. Like we have 15 years of building and we've honed it. And, you know, it took 10 years to get recognized again. And really it wasn't until, you know, we won some awards, like pretty good local awards. There were people in preservation from some of our local lobbyists and stuff have given us awards. We've been in the paper a few times. And let me tell you, every time that happens, man, it always seems like, you know, things, you get stuff in return as far as marketing. And, but it took a while. But again, it's just about recognizing and being aware of your, when you screw up and being able to like remedy that.
I have another question.
Yeah.
You said you got your company is centered in San Marcos
Mm-hmm.
area. Have you had any issues coming across living in Southern California with earthquakes, damaging your glass, whether your personal, like at the studios or in the client's work?
So we had a bunch of work in Brawley, which is right by the border of Mexico. And about 8 years ago, they had a pretty significant earthquake, and some of the building was damaged. But what's crazy that we found out is when you think about stained glass, it's not like a fixed uh, piece of one, you know, piece of glass. It's interlaced with lead, and thing about lead is it's malleable, and so you can actually shake a window and there's definitely like movement and give, and that actually helps tremendously to survive an earthquake. Now, I can't remember how big it was, but I was really surprised that none of the stained glass fell out and none of the stained glass was damaged. But then you would see like the whole storefront of a whole entire downtown area where every tempered piece of plate glass or whatever was just shattered and stuff was everywhere. So I was really surprised at that. Now, for us locally in our shop, man, like you do not want to be by the wall of glass if an earthquake hits. And, we have everything secured as much as possible. And we run lines to kind of control it. But I don't think I could, I don't think I could, properly do anything to keep our place from falling if, big enough earthquake hit, for sure. So, but we've never really had any significant problems. Thankfully. Not to say it won't.
Someone in chat asked, do you take vacation breaks?
Oh man, dude, that's a crazy one. No, no, we don't. It sucks. I wish. No, we have a vacation every day, really. Because I wake up, I'm like, coffee, news. Oh, we'll go to the studio, But no, we don't. We visit family, we do things like that, but it's unfortunate that it's really bad. But we have so many projects. Like I have 3 major projects going. I literally have like 160 panels in my studio right now. And we get calls every week from contractors. And one project is like incredibly, it's the best project we've ever gotten, the highest profile project ever. And I always feel compelled to get these done. And a lot of times it takes a year to 2 years to get things done. And we have all these overlapping projects. So there's like never a moment where Nicole and I are like, hey, let's take a week off. Because the thing about being a business owner, if you're not making money, man, you're not sustaining your life. I mean, that's one reason why I teach as an adjunct professor, because it's enough to like pay my rent for 6 hours a week. It's great. Can't beat that. But yeah, that's the sad truth. I don't take vacations. But hey, man, I live in San Diego. Where am I going to go?
So when COVID's, whatever we can call it, contained or changed or whatever, you're going to be hiring more people to do all these installs. Because, right, you were saying at the beginning, and we talked on the phone before this.
Yeah.
You're not.
Yeah, we lost all of our employees. Yep. We had 3 people working for us, and now it's just Nicole and I. And we did bring back one. He's an older gentleman. But yeah, we don't. It's really bummed. It's really bummed, But I mean, I can't hold it against him, I mean, that's the state of our studio, anyways. Like people come in and come out, I haven't had an apprentice. Maybe one day, but I mean, when you hire college students in the like, it's temporary anyways. You're lucky to get a year or 2 out of people. But yeah, if you guys are looking for a job, like, send me a CV. It's dirty work, hard work. Oh, you know what? That's another thing I realized is the connection of your physical, well-being and how well you can produce the quality work and the amount of work that you need to. And I'm not quite 50, but I'm getting there. And I realized at 30 I needed to maintain a good physical conditioning. And literally like doing 100 push-ups every day, you'd be really surprised at how well it helps. Because when you're drawing and you do this 10,000 times, like you get those cramps right here in your forearms. Man, push-ups, it'll really do push-ups and sit-ups at minimum, and it'll really help your studio practice. I'm telling you.
That's a great tip.
It really is. It's incredible.
You got to call Beal out on that.
Well, he plays tennis, so whatever. He's
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
He's a tennis guy. He's got good leg conditioning.
It's important to the brain, right?
Yeah, I got a question. So you said you had a brief stint in the military. What was it like, and how do you think it affected your art? Yeah, it's
um okay, so when I was like 17, 18, I grew up in Indiana, and I came from very humble backgrounds monetarily. Like I don't want to say we were poor, but we definitely, let's just say I had a lunch card, you know what I mean? And I knew that my family, matter of fact, I'm the first person in my family to get a degree, and the only person in my family still. And I knew at a young age that like I needed to take matters into my own hand. And so that's when I decided to join the Army to get college money. And that was back in the early 90s. And it was right when the first Gulf War, for those of you maybe old enough, you might remember how quick that happened. But that's when I went in, and thankfully I didn't have to go anywhere, and I didn't have to be subjected to any kind of craziness. Got in, got out, and it helped sustain my career as a college student, getting monthly income. It was great. How did it influence me as an artist? One thing the military does for most people is it gives you like this supreme sense of confidence in that there's really no situation or place in the world that you could just be thrust into and you don't have the confidence to be like, oh, I'm good. Like, I'll survive this. I'll get through this on my own accord, And so it kind of gave me that confidence. It might be delusional, but it's there and it helps. And it also, I don't know, like it made me appreciate not being in the military because it's not for everybody. And it also taught me that just because people are older than you and in a higher rank or a higher position doesn't mean they're smarter than you. And I realized that I couldn't subject myself to that in a long period of time and remain sane. So I got out. But I also realized, the importance of the chain of command in that, yeah, if there is an authority figure, you have to respect them because you might think they're dumb and not as smart as you. But the fact of the matter is they're the director of this museum and you should listen to them and, make a concerted effort to do what is asked of you. Doesn't mean that you can't speak up and, be like, I don't agree with this, but it's important to be respectful of, a higher position because one day you're going to be in that position. And let me tell you, I became a great employee once I became an employer because I realized like, wow, there's so much shit going on this end that I had no idea when I was a dumb employee, So I don't know if that helped my art, but it definitely helped in business.
Yeah.
I don't put an emphasis on being a veteran. Matter of fact, never say thank you for your service to me. It's so annoying. Matter of fact, 80% of veterans are probably going to say the same thing. You'd be surprised. And I don't understand why people put so much importance on it. If you're not a veteran, maybe it's like the unknown and like this myth or something. I don't know. I don't want to get into that. But I do recognize locally that PTSD and veterans suffer greatly now. Like there's a tremendous amount of it. And I've actually been involved with a lot of community outreach and nonprofit organizations that deal with art therapy and veterans. And let me tell you, the power of art therapy is tremendous. And if you get into that field, that is an absolute noble endeavor that can burn you out, but it's worth it because you can heal and help a lot of people through art. Absolutely.
Yeah, that reminds me, maybe that's, I have a couple of former students who are working in the field and to have someone in to talk about that, because I think it's not something that gets a lot of discussion in certainly in a, BFA program.
Yeah. So I saw the chat. They're asking about the organization. The one that I was involved with locally was called Vet Art. bronzeart.org, and it's a ceramics and glass type studio, and they do bronze casting. It's a North San Diego County in Fallbrook. They give free bronze casting classes to veterans, and you go in and you get your face cast in bronze. It's amazing, and your hands. I mean, it's incredible. But it's funny. There was veterans and art symposium that I went to like 2 years ago, and it was in Balboa Park. I don't know if you know about Balboa Park, but it's like a cultural icon in San Diego. Tons of museums, and it was held in the Veterans Art Museum in Balboa Park, and there was about 80 different organizations, and I was very surprised at how many were involved with veterans in art. Like everybody was there. I was like, wow, this is tremendous. And it was kind of interesting because they like said, hey, Brian, stand up and introduce yourself, whatever, and what you do. And I was like, well, you're sitting in what I do. And so you just looked up, and it was it used to be a naval chapel that was done by Fred Wieland, who is an absolute big influence on me as a stained glass artist. And I've restored a ton of his work. And he and his brother were German stained glass artists back in the 30s in San Diego. And it was a very interesting moment, that kind of that Herman Hesse quote. Like, it was a really unique, weird moment that kind of culminated in this. I don't know, it was profound, I thought. But yeah, there's a ton. Just look up, veteran art therapy. Like, there's tons of organizations.
Well, I think we're winding down. What an
Yeah.
amazing evening. And thank you so much. I love seeing the changes that have happened since you last lectured for class. And I'm excited to see, next year things will continue to go well, and for you and Nicole. And thank you so much for joining us tonight. Yeah, everybody, check out the great conversations Brian and Joe are having on Beholders Share on Twitch and YouTube. It's great.
Yeah, we're trying to just get local, art talked about and build a community, because we're so disconnected right now. It's pretty easy to do it on Zoom. So that's what we're doing.
Yeah, that's the big advantage is, some of the students last year, when we jumped so quickly into Zoom, said they kind of preferred it to the classroom. And even though the screen is tiny, it's like Brian's right here at home with us,
I know, I'm in my bedroom. It's great.
It worked out. So, well, thank you, Brian.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Thank you so much. See you soon, I hope.
Yeah.
It looks like so far you're a class favorite.
Oh, wow. I don't know what that means, but thank you. I got a bunch of likes. Is that what's going on?
Yeah. The most liked presenter so far. Yeah.
That's cool.
There's a lot of comments for you in the chat, so we like you generally.
All right. Right on. Hey, I like you guys too. Hey, I feel connected, man. I'm telling you. Joanna's amazing, you guys. I know you all know it. I don't even say it. This class is great.
Yes, I get to listen. I don't have to talk. Absorb everyone else's brilliance. So.
Yeah, right.
All right. Well, have a great night, and best to Nicole, and thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Hey, and seriously, reach out to me if you guys have any needs or potential employment.
Yeah.
All right, take care.
Take care. See you soon.